Thank you, Professor. Hi, everyone. I am Victor Costa from the University of Coimbra, and today I will present to you the paper demonstrating the evolution of GANs through t-SNE. So generative adversarial networks became very relevant in the past years, mostly in the domain of image and by showing impressive results in this domain. However, the training of GANs is hard and is frequently unstable. And the generative performance is not a straightforward task to visualize. So and we propose here in this work a new evaluation method that is based on the t-SNE that demonstrates the progress and the evolution of GANs. In our earlier work, we propose COEGAN, that is the application of evolutionary algorithms to train and evolve GANs. And we are using this model to apply our evaluation method proposed here, and we will show some experimental results in the end. So let's start talking a little bit about GANs. This is the overall overview of the model. A GAN is composed of two components, a generator and a discriminator. The generator receives as input some random noise and has to transform this input into some sample. In cases of image, the generator has to create some image, and this image is passed through the discriminator that is also trained with some input dataset, and the discriminator has to distinguish between image that is from this dataset and also images that is from created by generators. In the end, the generators and the discriminator are trained together and to achieve the results that is the generation of images that is similar to the input dataset. Here you can see two examples of the application of GANs. In the right, using a digits dataset, and in the left, using a faces dataset. And in the last column of each one, we can see the production of the generation of samples by GANs. But the training of GANs suffers from some stability issues. The first issue that I want to mention here is the vanishing gradient. This problem occurs when the discriminator classifies almost perfectly the samples and successfully distinguish between samples created by the generator and samples from the input dataset. In this case, the generator stops to improve, and this affects the stability of the training process. You can see here a representation of this problem where this issue occurs. Another issue is the mode collapse problem. This issue occurs when the generator captures only a small fraction of the distribution. In this case, here we have three examples of the generator trained using a digits dataset, and it failed to capture the distribution and generate sometimes only some digits and other times only noisy images. So to avoid this stability issues, several improvements were proposed for GANs. One of these improvements focused on the alternative loss functions like WGAN, LSGAN, and HASGAN. Other alternatives were proposed to set some best practice for the architecture of discriminators and generators, like in GCGAN. And we also have the use of evolutionary algorithms to drive the training and evolution of GANs. In this case, these algorithms use selective pressure to train and evolve GANs. We have some in the literature, like EGAN, Pareto GAN, Mustangs, and COEGAN, that is a proposal made by us in the past. So I will talk a little bit more about this proposal. COEGAN is a coevolutionary generative adversarial network model that uses competitive coevolution to represent the problem. In this case, coevolution and neuroevolution are combined with GANs as a unified solution to train and evolve GANs. We use an evolutionary algorithm based on NEAT and deep NEAT to drive the evolutionary process, and we model the problem as a competitive coevolutionary problem. So instead of having a single generator and a single discriminator in our model, we have an entire population of generators and an entire population of discriminators that are paired and following some competitive coevolutionary strategy to evolve the components. Here we follow, obviously, a basic structure of an evolutionary algorithm. So we have the classic steps that is selection, reproduction, evaluation of the population to generate new populations and new generations in the evolutionary process. Here we can see the representation that we used in our model. We have here two examples. In the first example is the genotype of a discriminator that is composed of 3 genes. Each gene represents directly a layer in a neural network. So here we can have a convolutional layer followed by another convolutional layer, and finally a linear layer that outputs the probability of the image to be from the input dataset or created by the generator. Each gene has some internal parameters that are object of the evolutionary process. In the second genotype refers to the generator. Here we have some linear layer as input, followed by 2 deconvolutional layers that will produce the image results in the end. As fitness function in the evaluation phase, we use the original loss function of GANs for discriminators. And for generators, we choose to use the FID score that better represents the quality of generators and works well in our model. In the selection step, we use the speciation mechanism inspired by the NEAT model. Therefore, individuals from the population of generators and discriminators are divided into species, and a distance function is applied in each individual to determine which species the individual belongs to. So this function uses the genome of the individuals and group them into subspecies. In COEGAN, we use asexual reproduction to create new individuals. So we define 3 mutation operators that are applied to evolve the architecture of generators and discriminators. One operator is to remove an existing layer. Another one can modify the internal attributes of some layer. And finally, we can add a new layer based on the set of possibilities that we have for our model. It's also important to note that while applying these operations, we always try to keep the weights of the parents when generating the new children. In this way, we can emulate some sort of transfer learning mechanism between individuals from different generations. In our previous experiments of COEGAN, we discovered that the stability on training was achieved, and COEGAN was able to discover efficient models and architecture for generators and discriminators when trained in some datasets like MNIST and fashion MNIST. Here you can see some examples produced by our model. However, one question remains open, that is how the distribution of the samples is compared to the distribution of the input dataset. So we developed this evaluation method that we show here in this image. In this method, first we train our model, our COEGAN model, using some input dataset that in this case is a dataset of fashion items. And then we use the discriminator that was trained in this process to evaluate the samples from both the input dataset and also samples created by the generator. And we apply the results of this evaluation to the t-SNE to generate some maps that distributes the sample in a two-dimensional grid. And in the end, we also compare maps between maps created by generators and the maps created by the input dataset. And we extract a metric based on the Jaccard index to represent these distributions based on the two-dimensional grid that we achieve here. So let's have some overview about the t-SNE method. The t-SNE, or T-distributed stochastic neighbor embedding, is useful to produce the visualization and review the data of complex distributions. It uses the divergence between the high-dimensional input space and the corresponding lower dimensional representation to distribute the data into some grid. It has mainly two parameters to control this distribution. That one of them are the perplexity, that refers to how the neighborhood of each data point is handled into the algorithm, and the number of iterations, that refers to the number of steps that are used to update the lower dimensional representation of the output. So we use this method to distribute the samples in a two-dimensional grid. Here we can see two examples of these grids, in the left for the input dataset and in the right for the generator after training with COEGAN. To represent the results through a quantitative metric, we also define a comparison mechanism between maps. First, we calculate the Euclidean distance between each sample in the dataset map and each sample in the generator map. So for each sample produced by generators, we get the nearest sample in the map of the input dataset with respect to the Euclidean distance of these maps. The median of these distance define a global threshold, and that is used to calculate the intersection between these maps. So we consider in the intersection between the map of generators and the map of the input dataset the samples that has a distance that is smaller than this threshold. This distance is never zero. This is why we need to define this threshold to use here. So using this information, we can calculate the Jaccard index, that is an intersection of over the union of the elements of the two maps that we are to compare and evaluate. In this case, we use the map of the input datasets and the map of the generator because we want to see how the distribution of the generator is compared to the input datasets. Here we can see some experimental results. We train COEGAN on the fashion MNIST dataset. We visually inspect the distribution of the generated samples using our evaluation method in generations 5, 10, and the last generation. And we also quantify the performance of COEGAN using the Jaccard index that is proposed to be used in this work. Here we have some parameters that we use in our experiments, and please refer to the paper for more details about this experimental setup. And here we have some results. This is the distribution of the input dataset using our evaluation method. We can see that similar clouds are grouped in the same region of the map. This is for the input dataset, and this is for the generation 5 of COEGAN. we can see that only noise is generated in the initial step of the algorithm, and the images are all grouped mostly in a single region of the map. In generation 10, we start to see some distribution through the grid, and we also start to see some structure in the images, following the characteristics of the input dataset. And finally, in the last generation, we achieve good quality in the images, and also we can see that the distribution is similar to the input dataset. So here we can see the progress of the maps of COEGAN that starts with some concentrated region of the samples, and then those samples are spread through the map until the end that the images achieved a relatively good distribution. So when we take the final generation map and compare to the input distribution, we can see that the structure of the data is very similar. But we can visually inspect this, but we can also in this work measure this through the metric that we propose. So first we can show here that the distance of samples from generators and the nearest and farthest images from the first image datasets. So we represent in this graph that samples that has small distances also present a small root mean square error in respect to the images. Here we show some examples of this. In the top row, samples created by the generator, and the nearest and the farthest samples from the input dataset. We can see that the two first rows are similar, and the last one, as expected, is not similar. So here we show the distribution of the distance between samples from generators and the nearest samples in fashion feminist to calculate in the end the median that we use as threshold to develop or to develop and use it in our metric. So in the end, we apply the Jaccard index that is represented here in our experiments. So in the first generation, the Jaccard index is very low because we only have noisy images, and the input dataset, of course, has images with relatively good quality. And we can see a growing pattern as the number of generations increases. In the end, the generator trained by COEGAN achieved this Jaccard index of 0.753. So to conclude, we propose here a new evaluation method to assess the progress of GANs. We define this method based on the t-SNE algorithm that is capable to provide and review the structure of the data, but we also use this information to derive some metric to compare some distribution with the distribution created by generators in a GAN. We show by the experimental phase that the evolution of COEGAN through this evaluation method is progressive. So COEGAN evolved progressively the generator to achieve relatively good results in the fresh image dataset. We also found no evidence of mode collapse when using this evaluation method. And we show that our proposal to apply the t-SNE also aggregates similar samples in the same region of the map. What remains open for our work is to apply this evaluation method in other generative models. We also want to correlate this Jaccard index that we define here with the FAG score and the inception score that are used in the GAN community. and also evaluate these evaluation methods and COEGAN in more complex datasets such as Celeb A and Cypher10. And that's it. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Victor. I'm Wolfgang, and I'm going to be responsible for the discussion here. Questions from the audience. You can use your microphone, and let's see what's happening in the chat. Can you see the chat, or should I read it?
I can see the chat.
So that's from Emma.
As t-SNE is stochastic, do you fix the seed? In fact, we use a single run of the t-SNE algorithm with all the input data, because otherwise we will get different results. So we use a single run with all data condensed in this execution. Let me see, otherwise you get different embedding every time. Yes, of course. Also, do you take into account the quality of the embedding using the trustworthiness metric to be sure the embedding is good enough before you calculate the Jaccard metric between two embedding? What we do to validate the trustworthiness was to make some comparisons between images that are close to other images in the map, and apply the root mean square error of these images, and we can see that this error was small for images that are close, and this error is big for farthest images.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? If we are sort of in this waiting pattern, I would have one question for you, Victor. I'm not sure whether it's a stupid question or not, but would it be possible to use the t-SNE as another loss function?
I don't think so, because this should be a differentiable function, and I'm not sure that this fits here in backpropagation. I'm not sure about it. I don't think so in the end.
Okay.